Pei Aleph Amud Aleph, the Mishnah right at the top of the Amud. Etzem, what's the shear of a bone? What's the shear for taking out a bone on Shabbos? Kedei lasa is tarva. The shear is to make a small spoon. Rav Yehuda Omer kedei lasa is menochaf. He says the shear is to make a lock. The Havamina at this point, initially of the Gemara, is assuming that it means the entire lock. To make a lock out of it. Out of ivory, you make spoons, you make locks. So Rav Yehuda says it's to make the locks. Chuch is, what's the shear of glass? Kedei lagar boy roish hakarka. It's to scrape the top of the karka. The karka, as we said before, was like the stick that they poked when they were weaving. They had the threads of the chassis that they were on the warp, that sometimes they got tangled or overlapped, so they used it to separate the threads of the chassis before they did the weaving back and forth with there. So they used to make it sharp at the top of it so that it could easily separate the threads and pick at it and separate the threads of the chassis. So the amount that's needed for this sechuch is to scrape the rosh karka. Tzror or even a pebble or a stone is kedei lizrik ba'ayv. It's to throw it to scare away a bird. When a person wants to scare away a bird, he would take a stone and throw it, and that's the shear for the stone. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Vaymer kedei lizrik b'behema. He says no, it's not a bird. A bird screaming at it, it'll fly away. It's the size of a stone that's needed to throw at a behema to chase away the behema. Frankly, Gemara Lameim the shear of the Rav Yehuda Nafish, you mean to say that the shear of Rav Yehuda is the larger shear? Again, we're assuming that Rav Yehuda said that it's a chaf, it means the entire lock, which is a larger shear than the tarva, than the spoon. We know from the previous Mishnayos that Rav Yehuda his shear is not the larger shear, it's a smaller shear. So Lameim the shear of the Rav Yehuda Nafish, Kaim Lan the shear of the Rabbanan Nafish. We know from the previous Mishnayos, from the Tloi, etc., that the shear of the Rabbanan is the larger shear. Amar Ula said, therefore, the understanding in Rav Yehuda is not what we originally understood, that it means the entire lock. What it means, what the chaf is, he means to say is, Amar Ula chafi beisachas. What it means is, it means the bolt or the latch of the lock. It's not the entire lock itself. It's literally the shine, of the shinayim of the lock. Chafi paisachas. If you had the lock, that there had the latch or the bolt that would be inserted into the lock to close the door, to lock it in its place. So it's just that bolt, that not the entire lock, and that is a smaller shear than the shear of the Rabbanan that says a tarva, that says a spoon. Ton Rabbanan chafi paisachas tahar. The latch of the lock, the bolt, they're tar. So long as they've not been attached yet, fixed to the lock, it has no purpose to it. It's not considered a kli. So it's only considered like a raw material. A kli is makabel tumah. So prior to it being fixed to the lock, it has no purpose. It's not makabel tumah. Kavin b'v'sachas tameim. Once it's affixed to the lock, then it's tamei. It has a purpose. It's considered a kli. But what type of lock are we talking about? That would be like a box, a chest. Then it would be a kli, and it's makabel tumah v'shalgal. But if it's affixed to a door, afal pi shechibra bedelis v'kaven masmerim, even though it's nailed in, it's tahirim, it's tar. Why is that? Shekol mechuber lekarka reiku karka. It's attached to the door, which is attached to the ground. It's the lock of a door of a house. Then it's mechuber lekarka. It's considered like attached to the ground. Something that's mechuber lekarka is not makabel tumah. The tumah house can be makabel tumah for manega, but if it comes into contact with a sheretz, it's not makabel tumah. Something that's attached to the ground is not makabel tumah. An oil, a mez, can be makabel tumah, but a mez that comes into contact with the outside of the house, it's not makabel tumah. So here also, the latch, the chavi paisachas, if it's attached to the lock of a house, a door of a house, it's considered mechuber lekarka. It's not makabel tumah. Zechuch is kedei ligra. Glass is to scrape the karkar, the rush of the karkar. Tana, we learned the brisa schuchis. It's another way of saying schuchis. Is kedei lipsoy by shnei nimkachas. The shear is, in order to, we say that it's to take two hairs and to cut them at one time. It's another definition of the shear of the glass, is to cut the two hairs at one time. That's the different shear of the schuchis. Rashi explains that sometimes the schuchis is called schuchis because it's something that is a seichen, but you can see through it. The zechuchis with a zayin is because it's zach and it's clear. So that's why the two expressions of zechuchis. Tzror or even kedei lizrik ba'oiv, if there's a pebble or stone, it's the shear to scare away a bird, to throw it at a bird. When we say that it's to throw at a bird or to throw at a behemoth, according to Rabbi ben Yaakov, but it has to be that not just scaring it away when it sees the stone in the person's hand. It means it's big enough that it feels it, and because of the pain or the striking of it for the stone, that's why it runs away. So it's chasing it away, not from the fear of the attempt to throw, but actually the feeling of the hitting of the stone on the body of the bird or the animal. It's the weight of 10 zuz. Zunin all the midrasha. Zunin came to the base of Rabbi. He asked the question of Vonim Shal Basic Kisi. In those days, they of course didn't have paper that they used for the bathroom. They used stones. So he says, Vonim Shal Basic Kisi Shiurim Bekama. What is the shear? What is the shear of the stones that is Bekama? That there are really two issues over here. What are the shear of the stones that one is allowed to use on Shabbos, even though stones are normally muksa, but Mishum Kavod Abrius, they were matir, the stones for the basic kisei. Another aspect of the question is that for Haitzah, what is the chiyuv for Haitzah? What is considered something that is chashuv, what is normally used? What is the chiyuv of Haitzah? Amrloi kazayas ke'egaz kebeya. He says, well, they normally use three different stones. First, they use a smaller one, and the size of a gazayas, then a middle size of an egaz, a nut, and then the size of a bay. He said, what should he bring in a scale to measure the stones? He's not going to be able to, on Shabbos, measure them to see what stones he can use. So, nimna v'gamra malayad, the nimna v'gamra, that the shear is a handful, a fistful. He can take in a fistful of stones, and that's what he can use for the basic kisei. So there's a machlokes, the Rishonim over here. Some learn that it's molayad. It doesn't matter how many stones are in his fistful. It's a fistful of stones, and whatever whatever will fit into his hand, that's what he can take in. According to the Rambam, it's not it's limited to 3. But we don't say it's specific to the size of a kazayas, ke'egaz, a kebeya. It's whatever 3 stones can fit into his hand, but it's still limited to 3. Tanya Rav Yossi kazayas, ke'egaz, kebeya, and the Rav Shimon and Rav Yehuda mishum aviv kimalei ayad. Tan Rabbanan gimel avanim akurzolo is muter la'achlos basic kisei. You're allowed to bring in 3 stones of the sharp stones. Those are the type that they use for the bathroom. You can bring in 3 stones to the basic kisei. And what's the shear of it? Ramer ke'egais. Ramer says ke'egais. Rav Yehuda Ramer ke'beya. He says ke'beya. Amar Rav Bar Papa Amar Rav Chisda k'machlokes kan kach machlokes be'esrei. The machlokes we have here is a similar machlokes that we have by esrei. What is the minimum size of an esrei? It's a kazayas. Or is it a ke'egos rather? Ke'ego is a kebeya. It's a minimum size like an egos, the size of a 9 or a kebeya. So frankly, Gemara, what are you to make you saying that the machlokes there is similar to the machlokes here? Hasa masnisan. Over there by esrei, it's a mishnah. It's a mishnah what the minimum is. A hacha b'raisa. Ella kemachlokes be'esrei kach machlokes kan. Rather, we make the brisa dependent on the mishnah. the machlekes in the Bryce over here is similar to the machlekes over there in the Mishnah Gabi Esrei. Amar Yehuda v'lo pious. He says, however, you cannot use pious. My pious. What is it referring to? Pious. What does that mean? Amar Zera Kashina Bavlaisa, referring to the types of stones in Bovel where they had clumps of earth. The soil was very soft, so sometimes the stones were not hard, and they used to break apart. So those stones are not suitable for the base of kisei because they crumble. So therefore, if they're not suitable for the base of kisei, then they are muksa. They're only matya, these types of stones that are suitable for a base of kisei, so therefore they're not muksa, they're not in the category of stones that are muksa. But these are not suitable. The Yomi Masechet, we're saying here that for the base of kisei, we have the different sizes of stones. We have kazayas, kegas, kebeya, and or mole hayad. However, the Mishnah said that the shear for stones is, what is the shear for Sroyer Evan Kedej Lizard Vaif or Blazman Yavzas Lizard Behema? So why do we have a different shear? Now, the size of these stones are referring to what is mut, what is not muksa, what is mutu to metaltal even in the chotzer, but it's also the shear of the stones b'chai for haitzah. So therefore, why do we have a different shear where in the Mishnah it says the size of a stone to throw at a bird or an animal? The teretz given is that those are only stones that are suitable for that purpose. So if they have a stone which someone would normally throw at a bird or an animal, then he's chayav for that. But stones that are designated for a basic kisei, a person will not use it for that other purpose. They'll be used for this purpose. What are the size of the stones that have a size of chashivas? These types of stones that are designated for this purpose, what is the shear of to be chayav for haitzah? It says that it's also to use the stone and do it in a way, use it in a way that he normally does during the week, because in the normal way that he does it, the way Rashi explains it, is also that he'll be afraid that there'll be hasaras hanimin. He'll cut some hairs. He'll cut some hairs, and of course that's also in Shabbos. So to use the stone in that way, with that type of pressure, and to be b'mashmish in that way, it'd be also in Shabbos because of cutting of the hairs. Taisus has a question, well, but it's still a Dovid Miskavet, and Rama holds that he holds pasuk like Rav Shimon that a Dovid Miskavet is mutter. So why would it be also in any event? Taisus says if he's memashmesh kederach, he's memashmesh b'chol, then he applies it with that type of force, it scrapes it in that type of a way, with that type of pressure, it's considered a psik reisha. So therefore, he's not allowed to be mash because there is mash b'chol. Should he come to l'dei sakana? If a person is not going to be able to use the proper hygiene and relieve himself properly in the bathroom, he'll come l'dei sakana. Our answer is kalach hayad. He does it in a way that's kalach hayad. So the way, according to Taisus Pshat, then kalach hayad means he doesn't do it in a normal way. He does it not with the full force of the hand. He does it with 2 fingers, or something of that manner, and therefore it's not a psik reisha anymore. Therefore, it's not a psik reisha. So that's the understanding of the Gemara according to Taisus. According to other Rishonim, the understanding is somewhat different. Is that if he does a kalach hayad, then it's not a malacha deraisa. The malacha deraisa would not be kalach hayad, and then even though normally would be also midrabanan, but mishum kavod abriyos, they were matter, the chum were matter it, even though it normally would be in Isra Rabbanan, they were matched under these circumstances. Rabbi Yana said, if he has a bathroom that's used on a regular basis, it's a malkum kavua. then Moleya, that's where we said he's allowed to bring in a fistful, a handful of stones, because the rationale is whatever might not be used now will still be used later on. So therefore he's not considered being metal to the stones, shaloi l'sarach. So that's where we said he can bring in a handful. But if not, if he doesn't have makom kavua, then what is not being used now will not be used later, so that's shaloi l'sarach. Then we don't allow him to bring in that many stones. Then we say mlav kehechra. Then we say it's a hechra. What's the hechra? The hechra is the middle size, the machriya. So we have the three sizes of stones. We have the smallest sizes that it's kezayas, the middle size is ke'ega, the bigger size is kebeya. The middle size ke'ega is the nut, which is in between the kezayas and the kebeya. That is the size of stone that he can bring in. Meducha, the mortar. They have a mortar where they crush the besamim. Meducha ketana shel besamim. So can that be used? If it has a stain on it, then it's mutter. That shows that it was used for this purpose, for the purpose of the bathroom, and therefore it can be, now it's considered not something which is muksa. Now why would this be muksa? So we're saying that if there's a stain that shows that it has a designation for a basic kisei stone, and otherwise you can't use it because it's muksa. So the Rashi explains that it's muksa because it's a klisha malach d'liser, that it's a klisha malach d'liser because it's used for crushing and it's used for grinding. The difficulty with this pshat in Rashi is that yes, but a klisha malach d'liser is muter l'tzarach gufa mekayma. So if he's using it for its purpose, it's not just removing it from the sun to the shade. A klisha malach d'liser is some want to say, therefore, that it's muksa because it's muksa machmas chasar and kis, which is not mutter l'sar guf mekayma. It's a kli that a person would not want to move because it has value, and by using it for other purposes might get ruined. And they mean it in that sense. But in Rashi he says a kli shemalachta li'isr. So they struggle with Rashi to understand why this would not be also for this purpose if it's a kli shalach l'isr, that it's mutter, normally mutter l'tzarach gufa mekayma. Someone explained that nevertheless in this type of case, it would be not mutter l'tzarach gufa mekayma because it was a kli shemalach l'isr and only l'malach l'isr. It's not used normally for other purposes. It's only used for this purpose and not used for other purposes, or maybe, and to explain it further is more fully and it's a purpose that a person perhaps would not want to use for this purpose. Hidavka would not want to use it for this purpose. He used to crush spices. He doesn't want to use it for basic kisei. So perhaps that even under these circumstances, kli shemalachta le'isr under these circumstances would be even sorach l'gufa mekayma. So, however, if there is a stain on it that shows that it's being used for this purpose and it's mutter meisvei, I'll ask you a kasha. Sorry, the form of Vimes ultimately is 10 things bring a person to hemorrhoids. Ve'len oichel ale kankanim, he eats the leaves from reeds, ale gefanim, or from grapevines, velule gefanim, or shoots from the gefanim, from the grapes, marigi behema, or ridged meat from an animal, like a tongue, etc., below melech, without salt. V'shedra shel dag, or the spine of a fish, v'dag maliach shalai bish kol tzarcha, or a salted fish that's not fully cooked. V'asheisa shimrei yain, he drinks the sediments of the wine. V'akamat mekaneach v'sid v'charses, and he uses for the kinuch and the basic kisei. He uses the sid, the lime of the charses, crushed brick, or b'tzror shekiniach b'chaver, a stone that someone else used. And some say that the person doesn't sit, he suspends himself in the basic kisei. But upon him, you see that a tzror shekinech by chaveri is a sakana. So why do we say that if this meducha has a stain on it, that that it would be permissible to use for the basic kisei. The more answers like yavish. Where do we say it's a sakana if it's not dry? If it's lach, but if it's yavish, then it's not a sakana. It's a difference on one side or the other side. So there's a stain on one side, but we don't mean he uses it on that side. He uses it on the other side of it. Or we're talking where if it's somebody else's, used by somebody else, but here we're talking about if it's an A, there's a stain from his use, so then it's mutter for him. What about it rained and it washed away the stain? Now we're saying that the stain shows that it's designated, even though it's a mortar, it's used for besamim, but now the stain shows that it's being used for basic kisei, and it's designated for basic kisei, it's not moksa. Why one person would not use something that was used by somebody else, so the Gemara gave the different terutzim that there wouldn't be a sakana either because it's his or it's from the other side of it, etc. So therefore it's not considered muksa, it's something that he could use. But if it's now washed away, do we say it's mevatel the yichud, the designation for basic kisei, and it's considered like any other mortar that normally would not be used for a basic kisei, or do we say that still it was used for a basic kisei and therefore it's not bottle, the yichud is not bottle, and it's not muksa? He says if there is still a trace of it, so therefore it's still the trace of the stain, it's not therefore designated usable for besamim anymore, it still retains the designation of a stone for a basic kisei, and then it's mutter, it's not considered muksa, because so long as there's a trace of the stain from the basic kisei, it would not be used anymore for the crushing of the spices. It retains its designation as a stone for the basic kisei, and it's mutter.